Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. A viewer requested a video of Queen Elizabeth and her hobbies. I thought that was a good idea. Okay, here's what I found out. First up, horses. According to royal.uk, Princess Elizabeth was introduced to horses by her grandfather, George VI, when he gave her a Shetland pony named Peggy. Princess Elizabeth got the pony for her 4th birthday. She began riding when she was 6, and by the time she was 18, she was an accomplished rider. She would ride up until her 90s. She started horse riding at a young age and reportedly used the activity as a way of reducing stress and getting exercise. Not only was she a rider, but she was an owner and a breeder of horses. Queen Elizabeth often watched her own horses run and witnessed some notable wins. On the 18th of June, 1954, her horse Landau won the Rose Memorial Stakes, and a stallion called Arroyo won the Hardwick Stakes. In 1957, the Queen had 4 winners during Ascot Week, and she became the first reigning monarch to have won Royal Ascot's Gold Cup with her thoroughbred Estimate in 2013. Her horse Highclere famously won the Prix de Diane at Chantilly in 1975. So a neat thing was that Queen Elizabeth was responsible for saving rare breeds of horses and ponies through the breeding programs in both her private yards and working yards, which produce horses for royal and state occasions. Breeds which Her Majesty championed included Highland ponies, Fell ponies, and Cleveland Bays. Now we all know that Queen Elizabeth loved dogs, so Queen Elizabeth got a corgi when she was 18. It was a female named Susan, and she was bred and had several generations from this dog, the corgi dog Susan. Some of the corgis are crossed with dachshunds, most notably Pippin, who belonged to Princess Margaret, to create dorgies, and Her Majesty owned corgis and dorgies ever since. Walking. Well, Queen Elizabeth enjoyed walking in the countryside with Philip, or alone, or with her dogs, or with all of them. And dancing. Both Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip enjoyed Scottish dancing. Each year during her stay at Balmoral Castle, Her Majesty hosted the annual dances known as Gills Balls for neighbors, estate, and castle staff and members of the local community. Gardening. Well, Queen Elizabeth didn't really get into gardening until she was in her 90s. According to BritishHeritage.com, reports emerged following the Chelsea Flower Show in 2018 that Queen Elizabeth had discovered a newfound love of gardening. The Telegraph reported that following a garden renovation at Windsor Castle, the Queen became fascinated by the art of gardening and gained some real knowledge on the subject. This is an unlikely hobby she had, but it was pigeon racing. Pigeon racing had been part of the royal heritage for a while, starting in 1886. Pigeons were gifted to the royal family and quickly took up residence in Sandringham Estate. King George and King Edward both fell in love with pigeon racing very quickly. An interesting act stated that during World War II, the pigeons of the estate were enlisted as carrier pigeons and ended up returning to the estate once the fighting had stopped. Queen Elizabeth remained the patron of several pigeon racing charities until her death in 2022. Next up, stamp collecting. BritishHeritage.com said Queen Elizabeth's stamp collection was said to be worth upwards of £2 million, according to the royal expert Phil Dampier. Her Majesty owned some of the most valuable stamps in the world and built on what was already a stellar collection that spanned several generations of the royal family. So Queen Elizabeth often took out her stamp collection to show visiting heads of state, and I'm sure it was an impressive collection. And then the collection was started by the Duke of York, who later became George V. And royal expert Phil Dampier said it was one of her pride and joys, not only because she owned some of the world's most valuable stamps, but also because she built a family treasure and felt she had done her father and previous monarchs who owned it proud. Prince Charles inherited the collection, but he said he's not into stamp collecting. His hobbies are watercolor painting and gardening. Queen Elizabeth loved driving in the country. Shutterstock.com said that Elizabeth first discovered her love of driving when she served as a mechanic in the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service toward the tail end of World War II. And she's owned a stable of Jaguars, Range Rovers, and more, and she was often seen riding around the estates. And the Queen, she gave up driving on public roads in 2019, but was photographed taking a drive around Windsor in November of 2021. And lastly, the Queen enjoyed football. Many of the members of the royal family are football fans, Prince William and George, just to name a few. The Queen was a great supporter of the team Arsenal. And this was told by a former team midfielder named Cesar Fabregas. He said that at the reception at Buckingham Palace. So Queen Elizabeth had many hobbies, and it showed her personality. We saw her love of animals, be it horses, dogs, and even pigeons. And she loved stamp collecting, which was inspired by her ancestors from the 1800s. And she also loved to drive from her time in the military, and it was her joy to drive around the countryside, getting away from the press and just being alone. And walking was the place where she could get rid of the stress of her job and help in her well-being. And she began to garden late in life, which goes to show it's never too late to take up a hobby. And she also enjoyed watching her favorite football team. So it's all these hobbies that helped shape who Queen Elizabeth was. It gave her joy, and they all made her happy. So I hope everybody enjoyed the video. And if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you haven't hit the notification button yet, if you do that, it'll notify you when new videos appear. So I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.